This week on Capitol Connection, lawmakers return to the Capitol for lame duck session.
But, what I want to make sure we do is focus on things that are part of our core values, things that Democrats all believe in a short period of time.
We sit down one-on-one with House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch to talk about the upcoming session and the looming budget deficit.
We're going to be ready to go line by line and do the work that the people have sent us here to do.
And joining us on our Reporters Roundtable, it's Jerry Nowicki with Capitol News Illinois and Brendan Moore with Lee Enterprises. It's all coming up on Capitol Connection.
From the Illinois State Capitol Rotunda, Capitol Bureau Chief Cole Hankey is asking the tough questions. This is Capitol Connection.
Welcome to Capitol Connection. I'm Cole Hankey. Lawmakers are officially back in the Capitol for a short lame duck session before the new General Assembly takes over. They have a few last-minute items they're hoping to take care of before the clock resets with the new General Assembly. They only have 4 days, but lawmakers will have one more opportunity to get some 2024 proposals across the finish line. On Friday, Senator Bill Cunningham filed a new group of clean energy policies. The bill would create some avenues to improve clean energy storage while also helping build out the grid.
There's a couple flashing warning lights on the dashboard right now that we have to take action on. And incentivizing the use of battery storage for energy can be a really big part of that.
Lawmakers could also turn to pension reform. Governor Pritzker wants to make sure that Tier 2 pensions meet federal Social Security standards.
But it's clear that it needs to be dealt with because otherwise you created a whole other liability for the state.
But a coalition of labor groups want to see much bigger changes and bring Tier 2 up alongside Tier 1 benefits.
Undo Tier 2! Undo Tier 2! Undo Tier 2!
And a bill that would prevent carbon sequestration projects under the Mahomet Aquifer is still floating around. The sponsor in the Senate, Champaign Democrat Paul Faraci, said in November, the last time they were in Springfield, he is planning to make this a collaborative process.
Our job, and I think many would agree, is to listen to the voices of people who have something to say about an issue. And so this is, to me, this is a prime example of the process working.
Hanging over discussions in the Capitol the next 6 months will be a projected $3.2 billion budget deficit. Republicans are already focusing on the shortage and calling on Pritzker to keep spending down in the new year.
We need to look at where we are actually spending money because we have to focus on Illinois taxpayers. They're taxed out.
When we come back, we have a one-on-one interview with House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch, where we talk about the challenges that are coming up this spring. We'll be right back.
You're watching Capitol Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. When lawmakers officially start the new General Assembly this week and go into this spring, the name of the game is going to be the budget, as always. But this year in particular, with a huge budget deficit looming and some past struggles still leaving some cracks in the Democratic caucuses, it'll be interesting to see how they deal with such a difficult financial situation. This week, I sat down with House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch to talk about just that and how he looks to manage his caucus going into a second term as Speaker. Here's our interview with Speaker Welch. House Speaker Emanuel Chris Welch, thank you so much for joining me today.
Cole, it's a pleasure always.
We're about to have a lame duck session kick off here. What's the priority list for you going into this little abbreviated session before the new General Assembly takes over?
Well, I think we're still trying to let everything shake out. There's a lot of conversations being had around several things, but what I want to make sure we do is focus on things that are part of our core values, things that Democrats all believe in a short period of time. You want to focus on things that we can agree on.
We saw in the Senate a new clean energy bill get put up yesterday. Are you aware of those negotiations? Are you kind of on board with what that's looking to do? I know there's some modifications to make sure especially the clean energy grid going forward is more secure.
There's been conversations going on around a lot of different topics, energy being one of them. I do understand there's been some positive development on energy, and by the time we're done with lame duck, there could be some action around energy.
You already mentioned you just said by the time we're finished with lame duck, as soon as lame duck's over, you're swearing in the new General Assembly, and you're going to be starting another term here as Speaker. I'm curious what your priorities are for going forward for this spring for this General Assembly.
Well, I mean, I think anytime we go into session, the budget is the most important thing that we do. It's the moral document that we all have to go home and talk about to our constituents, and so we know we have our work cut out before us, particularly after the November Gombe report that came out. But we faced those types of issues before. We're prepared to do it. We're going to be ready to go line by line and do the work that the people have sent us here to do.
Have you faced a $3.2 billion projected deficit before? I mean, that's even for some of the situations that Illinois has been in before. That seems pretty daunting for a spring session.
Well, remember, Gombe's job is to be very conservative and sometimes to be gloom and doom, and they're doing their job. They're painting a worst case scenario if the General Assembly does nothing. If we do nothing, this is what could happen. They've done their job. Now it's time for the legislature to do ours. We have to go line by line through this budget, be responsible, be compassionate, and continue to put balanced budgets on the board that Illinois can be proud of.
There's been a lot of focus on, the governor's role in this, and I've heard a lot of the phrase, him becoming governor, no, I guess, for the new year. But does this put you as well in a tough position to have to maybe tell your members no a lot more on some of their more ambitious ideas they want to come in with?
Well, I think going into session, we have to make sure everyone's being realistic. The Gombe report is the Gombe report. ARPA dollars are no longer around. We have to be realistic. And, I do believe that we can pass a balanced budget that's responsible, that's compassionate, that still cares about people across this state. But I think the message is come in, understand the fiscal realities that we live in, and let's all work together to come to some solutions.
How do you make sure that is translated correctly to a very broad, very diverse caucus that you have that has a lot of ideas? It's always look to the House for where some of these bigger ideas kind of can come from during a session.
Well, I think we have to continue to be very inclusive. We have to make sure rank and file is very involved in the budget making process. I learned something going into my second term as Speaker. I learned something new in that second term, and going into a third term, we'll make some tweaks. The goal is to always be more responsive, more inclusive, more democratic, and that's what the House Democratic Caucus represents. We're the voices of people all across this state, and their voices are going to be heard in that budget.
What was that lesson you took away from the second term?
Well, there's some tweaks that could be made to be even more inclusive than we have been. My style of leadership is to empower the rank and file, but I think there's even better ways of doing that, and we're going to explore ways of getting that done.
There can be bringing in more revenue to try to get rid of the deficit, or there can be the cuts side of it. I'm curious how you strike that balance, if you see this as a problem that can be fixed with cuts, or if this is more structural and there might need to be some more revenues coming in for the state down the line.
Yeah, we did some revenues at the end of last session. We still need to see how those shake out for us. But I think one of the first things we need to do is go line by line through the governor's proposed budget that he will do in February, and look for efficiencies. I think we should always start there. That's what taxpayers want us to do. They want us to be mindful of kitchen table issues, be mindful of what things cost for them at the grocery store, and we're going to do that. We're going to go through and look for efficiencies first.
That day-to-day, the life of the people in Illinois, the taxpayers in Illinois, I'm curious if that's even more front and center after what we saw in November with the election, where it seemed like the economy as this broader issue was kind of the prevailing thing on so many people's minds. Does that at least recalibrate a little bit how business is done in this building, or at least the end goals of this building?
Well, certainly the voters spoke in November, but we heard the voters even before November. We knew kitchen table issues were very important well before November, and that's why we were able to hold the Great 78, the record number of members in the House. We were able to knock on doors and address a lot of the issues. We were able to talk about the things we've done in the House to address some of their concerns, like the grocery tax issue, like removing junk fees and things of that nature. Are there more things that we can do? Certainly. I think we need to look at ways to address property taxes all across this state. I think we need to continue to look at ways that's going to put money back in people's pockets, and we're open for ideas.
And I guess with that, though, is this the year to have those, see action on those when we're starting to see at least the revenue that the state knows about right now, looking to come up a little bit short, creating this kind of deficit?
Can you rephrase your question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. You were talking about putting money back in the taxpayers' pockets. That takes money out of the state's pocket in that way. So I'm curious if now is the time to have those conversations when the state is staring down a deficit like this.
Well, you have to have everything on the table. I mean, last year we created for the first time a child tax credit. That's putting money back into people's pockets. That child tax credit was needed. We have to continue to find ways to help everyday working people. And that's why you've got to be open to new and fresh ideas. You don't want to exclude anything. And that's where we're going to be in the 104th General Assembly. We're listening to all ideas that's going to help working people.
What have those conversations been like, especially since that November report with Senate President Harman and Governor Pritzker? How have the offices been communicating since then?
We've had some conversations. We've had some early conversations about what this budget is going to look like, and certainly it's going to take cooperation from us all, from the House, the Senate, the governor's office. We're all going to have to work together to get this done.
Okay. And then just before we get going here, do you yourself have any big legislative priorities you want to see get done in the first year of the 104th here?
Well, I'd like to continue to see us pass balanced, responsible budgets. I'd like to see us continue to do things in the education space, pre-K through college. I like to make sure we're providing trade opportunities for folks that don't want to go to college. College isn't for everyone. We know that, and there's real money that can be made in the trades. And I want to continue to see if there's a way we can address property tax concerns. Property tax issues are real all across this state, and I want to make sure we can figure out a way to address the price of eggs. What can we do from a policy perspective to address the fact that a carton of eggs is more today than it was yesterday? It's all about trying to find ways to help people.
When we come back, we go to our Reporters Roundtable to talk about what lawmakers could have on their plates this lame duck session. We'll be right back.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. We now turn to our Reporters Roundtable to continue our discussion about the upcoming lame duck session. And joining us this week, it's Brendan Moore with Lee Enterprises and Jerry Nowicki with Capital News Illinois. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Brendan, we'll start with you. Lame duck session, super exciting schedule ahead here. What are you most looking out for in these few days they're going to be going before the new General Assembly takes over?
Right. Well, as you know, Cole, lame duck session is a time where things can maybe sneak through at the very end when you have the old legislators. A lot of them don't have to face voters anymore. This was a few years ago when the Safety Act passed in the middle of the night. So, in theory, you could see something big move. One thing that's been talked about a little bit is the need for maybe some more pension reform, because there's some concerns about whether the state's pensions meet safe harbor for Social Security. So that could be one thing. I don't think it's likely, but it's just an example of something that could happen. We're not hearing much from state legislators. I don't even think we have a schedule out yet as to what they might do, what legislation they might take up. There was some talk earlier a few months ago after President-elect Trump won about efforts to Trump-proof the state. Obviously, Illinois is a Democratic state. Our governor is a very vocal critic of the president-elect. That might not bode well for Illinois in terms of federal funding, in terms of other ways Illinois might be targeted. But just the folks I've talked to seem to say it's kind of a wait and see approach because nobody really knows what the president-elect or the administration in Washington is going to do yet. So it's very much we're in a holding pattern. I mean, they're going to do some stuff, but whether it's going to be earth-shattering, as we've maybe seen some of these lame duck sessions in the past, I'm not sure yet.
Yeah, Jerry, that's been kind of what we've been hearing for a long time now. I mean, last spring, they didn't really leave a ton left on the table to act on. There was even questions of whether veto would even happen or not, whether they would come back. They didn't really do anything in veto session. There's still some legislation they could act on, but I think a lot of the fervor that came post-election of we have to get back in the building, we have to start working, kind of fizzled out, I guess, in certain ways, and a lot of ideas didn't really actually grow out of that sort of reaction from lawmakers.
Right, and I think one of the interesting things with this lame duck especially is there aren't too many lame ducks in that there's not much turnover. The margins are going to remain the same in the upcoming session as they have been in recent years. So what we're looking at is bills aren't going to be significantly harder on January 8th after the new inauguration than they were on January 7th. So there's not real rushes to get anything done, but there is some bills that have already cleared one chamber that may just need approval from the other that could go. It's some of the, may have discussed it on here, the Kinship and Demand Act, which just generally allows family to be foster parents and get some of the same benefits from the state that are an easier path to benefits that foster parents receive. So it's just stuff like that. There's a bill regulating hemp-derived THC, which the governor's backed, that we could see come to fruition here. But as for the Trump proofing, it's sort of like they haven't telegraphed what that would be. And quite frankly, they've done a lot of it in the first Trump term that I think you can't rehash, but I'm sure they'll come up with something and we'll get the details right ahead of when they come out. But as of yet, they've kept it pretty tightly as to what we may or may not see. Maybe it's just not much.
Yeah, Jerry, you mentioned that Delta 8 bill. Governor Pritzker making a big deal of endorsing the plan that made it through the Senate last spring and stalled in the House. I guess that sort of teased that up maybe as their action they can take to just kind of close that one out real quick here. That bill is interesting. It doesn't have unanimous support. Obviously, it stalled for a reason in the House. Would put some pretty strict regulations on these THC products that don't fall under the same regulations as marijuana and are actually federally legal. That one is an interesting bill to watch to see how things play out. I had Representative LaShawn Ford just recently tell me he sees it as a way to potentially dig out of the financial hole a little bit, and they should tax those products more. So those are still some of the conversations that are happening on maybe some of the bills that looked at least teed up to finish in this lame duck session. Brendan, this whole slow-moving General Assembly going into the new year, Jerry said it's basically the same thing. There's no change in the numbers for the majorities. There's hardly any changes in some of the members that they're facing. Is this just an early start to the spring session? Get everybody here so they're here a little bit earlier going into the inauguration days and they can get conversations going earlier?
Yeah, I think that's it, and we saw that a little bit in veto session as well in November. They didn't really take a lot of legislative action, but sometimes it just helps to get them in the same room. They could start those conversations. Talked about maybe there being an energy bill to deal with some of the issues getting renewable energy online here in Illinois. There's talk about maybe doing a skinny bill in the lame duck, which would address some nearer term things, but also it would maybe tee up some conversations for later in the spring about a bigger bill. So there could certainly be some of that. And as Jerry said, I mean, there are some bills that are maybe kind of teed up where the Senate took action and the House just needs to approve, or vice versa. The Delta 8 bill is a great example of that. Passed, I think, 54-1 in the Senate. I mean, it was very bipartisan bill there, and it just seems like that's a House versus Senate issue, and we'll see if it gets resolved by Wednesday when they swear in the new General Assembly. But as you said, I mean, the margins are going to stay the same in both chambers. The Democrats, I mean, besides some votes on the budget last year, didn't really have a lot of issues passing their big bills. I wouldn't anticipate that for a lot of their issues this year until we get to some of the financial issues, which, as we've discussed on this show, are going to be quite steep come spring.
That's a great segue. Great segue. Let's go into I want to tie that, though, the financial pressures to that idea, the pension reform bill that you kind of brought up. This is the Tier 2 pension that they want, that we've seen labor unions, a whole labor coalition come together back in veto session and say they want huge Tier 2 pension reform, so to almost pull it pretty much even with what Tier 1 is now. Governor Pritzker has in no way endorsed that plan and has just talked about meeting that Social Security threshold that is needed to be federally compliant. And it would be interesting to see if they let that kind of fester, or if they get in, fix that Social Security issue real quick so they can kind of ignore the rest of the Tier 2 pension talk going into what is going to be a very, very difficult financial year for the state.
Yeah, it seems to me that the pension changes would also be accompanied by some level of what the governor has proposed in terms of extending the ramp for paying it down and increasing the goal to have it 100% funded as opposed to 90% funded in current law. So there are probably ways you could massage that to increase benefits while also not greatly changing the state's annual pension payment under law. I think any way you do it, you're probably adding some level of payment to that pension payment, but there are ways to mitigate it to some extent. But in terms of the broader picture as a whole, I think there's just, the budget is kind of the story for the upcoming legislative session, because $3.2 billion deficit is unlike anything the Pritzker administration. I mean, I guess you could count the COVID years in there that really threw things off, but ended up being in better shape because of some of the federal stimulus. But anyway, it's kind of unlike anything the Pritzker administration has seen coming into a session year. So essentially new programs are going to be off the table, and you're going to be looking at probably some need for new revenues or some need for spending cuts.
And where those spending cuts happen is obviously going to be a big deal as well. There's going to be a lot of pressure on some of the, I guess, more progressive programs that maybe have passed over the past 5 years under Pritzker. There was the Republicans are already taking aim at the programs that were created for non-citizens in the state. The health care plan in particular has been the prime target going back years now. So those kinds of conversations are going to persist. And yeah, Jerry, it'll be, I'm wondering if that whole that pension ramp extension and this Tier 2 adjustment for the Social Security stuff, if that doesn't end up being maybe a feature of the big budget address. We know last year Pritzker made that a big point in his speech of how he was not only going to continue paying down the pension stuff, but he had this new approach for kind of extending the ramp out, but making sure the benefits are still there. So I'm wondering if that's also kind of saved for that February window where he kind of gets to make his big pitch for what he wants the year to look like. That could be kind of where we see that pension can get kicked down the road too, if it doesn't get acted on in the next week.
Yeah, I mean, I think the governor has used his budget address to make similar proposals. He made that pension proposal to extend the ramp and get it to 100%. I think it was last year, maybe a year before. They all blend together, but but with the pension, Tier 2 pensions, I think what you're going to see is the governor is going to the administration is going to push for something that's kind of a bare minimum that they have to meet safe harbor, because they are very cognizant of what Wall Street thinks about the state's finances, and anything that could put in jeopardy the state's credit rating, which has been upgraded quite a bit the past few years. but obviously state has some financial issues ahead. They're going to be very cognizant of that. This is a governor who has his eyes on the future. He maybe has a re-election in 2026, we'll see, and maybe another campaign after that for a bigger house. And he's made the state, turning around the state's fiscal ship, a big part of that. So I think that he is going to be Governor No this year. I've seen that term thrown around a little bit, of saying, as Jerry said, no to new spending on new programs, and there's really going to have to be a look for some new revenues, perhaps. We haven't even talked about the need for the transit agencies need a lot of money. The CTA and Metra and PACE up in Chicago need, I believe, $750 million. That's the cliff that they're facing. And so how are they going to figure that out? Probably going to need some type of revenue enhancement for that. So it's going to be a very tough budget picture this year, and we're going to have to see how the governor puts it together in his address in February.
Yeah, you said there's perhaps going to be the need for new revenues. Those are gonna have to come at some point when you look at these projections for that the governor's own budget team has put out. You have like the deficit for this coming year that is well documented, but that just continues to grow. And I know those numbers change when you address the initial part of it and everything, but you can only play Governor No for so long in shortening it. And if you make cuts, those groups are going to come right back to the table the next year and continue to call for that money to come back. So it'll be interesting. They've been able to find these clever little ways to raise revenue, which may not have been a widespread hit for much of the public. Last year it was sports betting, and they found the retail exemption. They finally got retailers to cave on that to claw some of that sales tax revenue back. And yeah, it'll just be interesting. I'm always fascinated. That's the big thing that I'm always looking for in that February speech is like, okay, what kind of clever way did they come up with to try to bring in some more revenue that isn't a income tax increase or something along those lines that everybody in the state is going to feel and remember during an election. So Jerry, I don't know if you have any opinions on that, or just if maybe they hold tight with the Governor No now and maybe look to down the road for some of those more fiscal changes, or if this is something that they act on quickly and just bite the bullet.
So the $3.2 billion does seem structural in that it's going to continue year after year without action that continues year after year. So, one of the things I've heard mentioned, certainly not by the governor's office yet, it's not anything proposed, but is there an appetite to add a tax on services? Illinois sales tax only applies to goods. It doesn't necessarily apply to things like Netflix streaming or labor or other types of services like that. So, I mean, that's in the fiscal reports you read just from straight budget people who aren't advocating either way. They say that's the clear path for making up large deficits if it's needed. So, I mean, that's one thing to watch for. Again, I'm not saying that's been proposed or anyone's filing a bill with that language in it right now, but it is something I'm going to watch for.
Got it. Well, Brendan, Jerry, thank you both so much for joining us. Looking forward to covering a new General Assembly with you guys. We'll be right back.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
That will do it for us on this week's episode of Capital Connection. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again next week for more coverage of what's happening here in the Capitol. For Capital Connection, I'm Cole Hankey.